Well, good evening, everybody, and welcome to our virtual town hall here in Poplar Bluff with my good friend and Speaker of the House, Stephen Tilley.
Thanks, Todd.
Steve, welcome to Poplar Bluff. It's always a pleasure to have you here in our community.
Always glad to be in Butler County.
We've got a number of questions tonight that have been sent really from all over the state. We're excited about them, covering a wide range of topics, so I think we'll just jump right in and get started. The first question is direct and to the point. What is an aerotropolis?
Well, you know what? An aerotropolis is a definition that basically defines an airport that's in the center of a city, and it's kind of the center of the economic engine. An example of an aerotropolis would maybe be Chicago, O'Hara, maybe a Midway. We hope to make St. Louis a version of an aerotropolis in Lambert, which is kind of far different than an airport like that's in Kansas City that's outside the metropolitan area, an airport like like Denver that's outside the metropolitan area. And so, when we look and we use the term aerotropolis, we're referring to an airport that becomes an economic engine of a metropolitan area right in the center.
One of the things that obviously we've been spending a lot of time in Jefferson City talking about is some tax credits that would go to help make that aerotropolis work. Jeff Darnell here in Poplar Bluff asks, can the state afford to keep giving out tax credits, and how do those tax credits impact the budget?
Well, Jeff, that's a good question because it depends on the tax credit. That's the answer. If you have a tax credit that has less than a 1-to-1 return on investment with no social value, probably it can. If you have a tax credit that generates more revenue to the state than you put out, then I would say you could. And let me give you some examples. You've got two levels of tax credits. One are economic development incentive tax credits, which you would expect a better than 1-to-1 return on investment. You've got social tax credits like the pregnancy resource tax credit, which aren't really designed to create economic benefit, but to hopefully prevent young ladies from making the wrong choice. And so, I think we've got a lot of great economic development tools. I think in the bill that we've got sitting right before special session that we're working on right now, we've got reforms within that bill that over a 15-year period of time will have a net savings of about $1.5 billion. And so I think in tough economic times, we've got to reevaluate everything and make sure that every dollar that we spend for the taxpayers is spent wisely. But I think we've got some really good economic development incentive programs, and we shouldn't throw the baby out with the bathwater.
Sure.
So, I think the question is, yes, I think we can continue to issue out tax credits as a form of economic stimulus and the social tax credits, which I think have a benefit, but we can't continue to give tax credits that don't give us a good return on investment.
One of the things you mentioned there, it relates to the next question. That comes from Robbie Myers here in Poplar Bluff, which is, there's been a whole lot of focus on the aerotropolis component of this. Obviously, this is a big bill that has a number of other parts to it. Talk a little bit about some of the other components that are in that legislation that's before us right now.
Yeah, it's not really, the economic development bill is not just aerotropolis. What we basically did is we looked at the Chamber of Commerce, all the business groups, and it's basically, we've lumped in what we think would be the best economic incentives to get our state moving. We're the third leading state in the nation in job loss. We have an unemployment rate higher than the national average. And I think when you have data like that, doing nothing is not acceptable. When families are struggling to find a job to take care of their family, doing nothing is completely unacceptable to me. So what we've got is we've got an economic development program which has aerotropolis in it, which I believe could transform the city of St. Louis if we could get it off the ground. And keep in mind, the tax credits for aerotropolis are retrospective tax credits, which means they have to actually do what they say they're going to do. They have to be exporting products to get the tax credits. But we've also got a MOSIRA legislation in there that would take some of the revenue generated by high-tech industries and allow us to reinvest that to attract more high-tech, high-paying jobs into the state. It's got an amateur sports incentive in there, which would allow us to compete with Michigan and Indianapolis or Indiana to try and bring more amateur sports to the event. It's got some incentives for data storage centers, which, thanks to our geography here in the state, we've got a tremendous amount of unused underground storage facilities that we could use to have data storage. In addition to that, it's got tax credit reforms, which, like I said earlier, save the state $1.5 billion. And so, you know, I think it's got a little bit, not just for the city of St. Louis and Kansas City and Columbia, but it's got stuff for rural Missouri as well, and at the end of the day saves money. So that's why I've been supportive of it. That's why if the economic development bill gets to the House, I feel confident that we can get the votes in a bipartisan fashion to pass it. And so it's more than just Aerotropolis, for sure.
One of the more controversial parts of that bill has been dealing with what we call the circuit breaker tax credit. R.A. Tim Bush asks, how can you aspire to be an advocate for seniors and consider supporting a bill that would eliminate the circuit breaker program for seniors to help Paul McKee?
Well, I mean, I disagree with the premise of the question, first of all, but let me address it anyway. The circuit breaker, and I was here in the House when we passed tax incentive or tax credits and tax help to provide assistance to seniors who are in their house. And you remember when property values were going up, their property taxes were going up year by year by year, but they're on a fixed income. And we passed a law that basically allowed some incentives to level that out. It was designed for homeowners, not renters, for one thing. Two, the elimination of the circuit breaker within the bill. The savings that we generate from that go to fund the Missouri Senior RX Plan. And for those of you that aren't aware what the Missouri Senior RX Plan is, it provides prescription benefit for almost 200,000 low-income seniors across this state. So the premise that we're eliminating circuit breaker and giving it to one developer is completely inaccurate. It's not true. What we're doing is eliminating the circuit breaker, providing a funding mechanism for the Missouri Senior RX Plan, which I tell you affect more seniors in the state than the circuit breaker. Now, and the second point of that is the circuit breaker provision is not a deal breaker for me. And so it was something that was started in the Senate. If it comes to the House with a changed version of the circuit breaker or eliminated, it wouldn't make a difference to me. But I certainly like the way that if we do eliminate, we take that funding stream and provide the funding for the Senior RX Plan.
One of the things that we spent a lot of time talking about with the budget last year was the Senior RX program. Talk a little bit about, for those that weren't following that budget process, why it's so important to have a stream of revenue to pay for it.
Right. I mean, the Senior RX Plan was started, I believe, under Governor Holden with the help of our Lieutenant Governor Peter Kinder, and it really is a great program. I mean, seniors shouldn't have to choose between paying their electric bill and buying their medicines or buying their food. And taking care of their health. And so it's a great program. It's worked, but it's an expensive program to the state. And in tough budget times, you have to make decisions of whether we can afford it. And I will tell you, it was, and this year, it was to the very end of the year that we secured funding for the Missouri Senior RX program. So it was actually in peril of not being funded this year. And if we can eliminate the circuit breaker and use those resources to fund that program, I think that would be a good trade-off.
Art Cole asks, what do you think the prospects of approving, at least through the House, the Made in Missouri Jobs Bill?
You know, I think it's good. You know, we were talking earlier off camera that the provisions that are in the bill have not only passed the House by overwhelmingly bipartisan fashion, they passed the Senate in overwhelmingly bipartisan fashion. We're only 3 months removed from when session ended. So, you know, I think the new spotlight on the Aerotropolis has made us look at it and make sure that we protect the taxpayers in it. And I'm not opposed to making changes that protect the taxpayers whatsoever. But I think if we get the economic development package from the Senate, we'll be able to send to the Senate back the agreement that we agreed upon before we went into special session. So I'm optimistic that we can. And like I said, the status quo is not acceptable. With the data that we've got, with the families that are struggling, doing the same old thing that we've been doing, it's not working. We need to try something different.
The economic